Alright, I believe I did the first two in a different video, so I'm just going to write down the answers, which would be negative x over y, and then this one was, oopsie, dy dt is equal to negative x over y times dx dt. And the next few I'll actually do for you. So we're going to do this with respect to r. So the derivative of v with respect to r is equal to 3 times 4/3 pi r squared. And since we're doing this in terms of r, this is what it would look like if I did every step. This cancels. These cancel. So dv dr is equal to 4 pi r squared. Now this one, because we're doing it with respect to t, we get dv dt is equal to, when we bring the 3 down in front, we actually end up with 4 pi r squared, and the only difference is now I'm going to multiply it by dr dt. Alright, the next one, let's see. So we're going to find the derivative of s with respect to theta. So now we're looking at theta as the variable. Tangent is secant squared of theta, which is equal to, and actually before I do that, I'm going to rewrite this so that you see I don't have to use the quotient rule. I can bring the constant down. That's multiplied by the derivative of s with respect to theta, and we get this guy. So the answer is 2000 secant squared theta is equal to ds d theta, and that would actually be the same thing as 2000 cosine squared theta at the bottom. So either of those two would be an answer. Now we're going to do this with respect to time. So when I take tangent's derivative, I get secant squared theta times d theta dt is equal to 1 over 2000 times ds dt. Therefore, if I just want to solve for this, I would move the secant squared over, and I get 1 over 2000 times secant squared theta. Some of you have already simplified that in your heads. This is the same thing as cosine being in the numerator. So cosine squared theta over 2000 times ds dt. Alright. Number 4. We're going to do this in terms of t, which is interesting because there are no t's to be found. This makes number 4 a lot harder because now you actually have to do a product rule, because now r and h are both variables, and if I'm doing two different variables being multiplied, I'd have to do a product rule. So dv dt is equal to, leave the first one alone, multiply by the derivative of the second with respect to t, plus leave the second one alone times the derivative of the first with respect to t. So I want to find dv dt. I actually did. I will clean it up a little bit just so it looks a little bit nicer. 2 pi r h times dr dt. Letter B says, find it but where h is equal to 4/3 r. Now, you could potentially substitute that in at the end, but what I want you to see is the fact that when you substitute that in the beginning, this is without the derivative, you actually eliminate a variable, which is really helpful. So instead of h, I put in 4/3 r, and I'm just going to clean that up by pulling the constant in front with the pi, because that's also a constant, and then r cubed. What I've done is now eliminated the product rule. So with respect to t, means I end up with 4 pi r squared times dr dt, which looks much simpler than part A. Okay, and then the second part of the homework, I believe, were these questions. I did number 3 for you, so I will go back and do number 1. We're doing the derivative with respect to t. So dy dt is equal to 1/2 x to the negative 1/2 times dx dt. And I'm going to rewrite that just so I evaluate correctly. I get 1 over 2 root x dx dt. And I want to do this when x is 4. So I get 2 times 2, and dx dt is 3. So 3/4. Alright, I did number 3 for you guys. So I'll do number 4 for you. Whoopsie, there should actually be a space right here. Wonder if I can create a space. Nope. Alright, so I'm going to actually do this one above because I messed up my copy and paste. So I want to do this when x is 3, y is 4, and dx dt is 8. And we're doing this with respect to t. So 2x dx dt plus 2y dy dt is equal to 0. And I want to solve for dy dt. This is my question, therefore I better have all my other variables. X is 3, or my unknowns. Dx dt plus 2 times y, which is 4. Dy dt equals 0. So dy dt is equal to, this is negative 48 divided by, looks like 8. Which is negative 6. Alright. So that's this 4.6.0 worksheet that'll help us for related rates.